Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 34th edition of Coffee with Ashish. And today we have got a very special and adventurous guest with us, Chitra Gurnani Daga. Before we get into conversation with her, over the course of last 33 episodes, we have talked about various categories of travel and distribution systems. And I think only once or twice we have touched upon the business of experiences, activities, and adventure travel. While we all agree that the whole point of travel, started 400, 500 years ago as a form of adventure and expedition. So that's something which is very inherent in our very innate to the human nature. And if you being somebody like me and Chitra, I used to do these expeditions to Ladakh a lot. There's a dearth of organized players who are available. There is a dearth of organized information, although there are pockets of communities and support on social media and other platforms you can look for, but there isn't any a curated content and information available. And also when you go to some of these destinations and do camping and expedition or hiking, you will find that sometimes the information which is available online and the situation on the ground is very different. And sometimes people who are actually managing these programs on the ground are themselves not avid adventure lovers, or they do not know the protocols around safety and how to run those programs, and they're just in that business, but they are not the same sort of avid traveler or adventure seeker like yourself. And sometimes that leads to a bad customer experience. And I think most of the millennials for sure are looking for an organized experience in adventure travel as well. And I've heard so many countless stories of my friends who are adventure seekers, and they all look for such kind of a structured play. And as always, I have got couple of cartoons to capture what happens to some of the travelers like us who go. And I mean, especially if you've been on wildlife safaris or camping, you might be able to relate to some of those experiences yourselves. And I can remember the top right one when I first went to do hiking, where I bottled so much of waters and supplies, and you realize that you really don't need much of it. So I mean, that's the situation the way it was at least 10 years back, and I can vouch for it that it's improved over the last decade or so, and especially to the likes of entrepreneurs like Chitra, who along with her partner Abhishek started this venture Thrilophilia back in 2011. And I think it's a classical story of how an entrepreneur or a entrepreneurial team faced a problem themselves as a consumer, and how they set out to solve that and make a business out of it. So they sense the opportunity because they themselves as adventure seekers face some of these issues, and they quit their comfortable IT jobs and they set this firm up in 2011. And it's also interesting to see along their journey, and I did some research that how they actually pivoted also, because they first started only as pure play adventure company and adventure operators, but then they saw that there's a larger audience for experiences, curated experiences, not only pure play adventure, and how they can also move from B2B to a more B2C platform as well, and actually directly interface with the customer and give this experience, personalized experience to the end consumer and not only to other travel agents. And now, in the last 8 years or so, the Thrilophilia is now India's biggest platform for travel activities and experiences. And they list over 4,000 odd operators in more than 200 plus cities and 15 plus Asian countries. And Chitra, who is the CEO of Thrilophilia, very well celebrated female entrepreneur in the country. She speaks a lot of forums. She's very well respected and looked up to. 40 million travelers use Thrilophilia every year now to book meaningful adventure travel experiences. They can book, discover, compare more than 15,000 experiences across the globe. And Chitra, apart from running this venture successfully, is also a mentor for a lot of startups. And you know she also runs a lot of initiatives around travel And in 2011, she also completed her MBA from Indian School of Business, and she signed off the campus placement to pursue her passionate venture. So that's something. And she's also recognized by Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, for her outstanding work in tourism. And beside that, she has been featured on multiple magazines, uh, won lots of awards as one of the India's recognized top women entrepreneurs. So we're very lucky to have you with us, Chitra, today. A very warm welcome to you on Coffee with Ashish. And with this, I'm going to hand it over to Ashish to have a conversation with you while I sit back and enjoy my coffee.
But Chitra, how's your coffee?
Great.
All right. So you're logging in from Jaipur, as we all
Absolutely.
know. But you know, yeah. Well, Karthik has more or less described your business model and the thrilling journey. And the last time I looked up, and that's for my audience as well, philia actually is an ancient Greek term for word love and friendship and affection. And obviously, thrill preceding is love for thrill. So how did the journey begin, and what's your model for people to hear it?
Great. So back in 2009, Abhishek and I were into corporate jobs. Monday to Friday, we were working, and Saturday and Sunday, we were hungry for travel. Outdoors, we were living in Bangalore, gave us ample opportunities for outdoors all around. And we were off to treks, off to outdoor activities, camps, remote into the jungle, and do all kinds of outdoor stuff.
Yeah.
And that's when we started realizing that we really don't have a place which gives us that kind of information that what do we have in India for outdoors. And India as a country offers so much landscape. So that's when we decided to start something of our own into this space, and we began with an adventure portal. As we moved on, we quickly realized that the Indian traveler is not a hardcore adventure guy.
Right.
Now the Indian traveler is looking for activities and experiences. When this traveler is traveling to a destination, this traveler looks for experiences which are local in that place. So it could be a coffee plantation tour, it could be a wine tasting tour, it could be a heritage walk, it could be a pub crawl, it could be an adventure activity also, right?
Right.
So eventually the segment very quickly widened from being adventure to being activities and experiences. That was our first pivot. In 2015, we suddenly realized a lot of Indian travelers were moving outside India. They were traveling because of good flight connectivities, Asia being very connected. So this trend of people traveling within Asia increased. And that's when we quickly launched the international destinations. So today we are into 15 countries, and we are going to launch a couple of more countries very soon in the next 6 months. So that's another thing that I would call was a scaling tipping point.
Right.
A third very important point in the journey that I would like to talk about is typically whenever we scaled a region, they reached a tipping point beyond which the quality would break. So typically all the operators would deliver a reasonable amount of quality to the end consumer up till a certain volume. And as we scale volumes, right, and we are a typical marketing platform, our strengths lie in digital marketing technology. Right. It's very easy for us to scale things. But if the on-ground operators are not prepared to handle the scale, this entire thing was pointless. End customer experience was breaking down. And that's when came the most important pivot of the business model, which is where we actually went on the ground, and we have our own outdoor team which travels, audits a lot of operators, their services.
Right.
We decide with whom we should work, with whom we should not work. We check the certifications. We see how much volume they can handle. We penalize them and we incentivize them through our random audits, which keep happening throughout the year. And we make them adhere to certain standard operating procedures. There's a lot of training that goes behind it. So we went ahead and did all this in a way, changed our model from being an only marketplace and only online platform to an online and offline mixed model, to a managed marketplace model, where we were able to have the end customer experience a much better quality.
Right. So that's how you deliver the value end to end on it.
Absolutely.
Right. So what you've done for us just now is traced, of course, how the journey began. You traced for us how the consumer preferences and likes began and how you yourself evolved to deliver the value. But while you're doing that, we get hit by COVID,
That's
right?
true.
So we have a situation in front of us, and you can't have a discussion in these times without addressing these times.
Absolutely.
So how badly have you been hit, and how have you coped up with it? And of course, people on the ground, which you talk about, who deliver that value for you.
True. So I think all of us agree on that. The travel is the hardest hit sectors. I mean, one of the hardest hit sectors.
Yeah.
Typically, everything else is gonna coming back, but travel is still taking a lot of time. And from where we left it to reach that point back is a long game. Long game. It's not a small one anymore. Now we are within travel. We are in the space of activities and experiences. So typically, if travel is going to come back, what will first come back is business travel. What will come back is essential travel that people are doing to meet each other. Leisure and holiday is still the last one within the travel to come back. And that's how Thrilophilia is the most hardest hit, I would say, in the travel segment.
Right.
Now, the small vendors and operators, to be honest, a lot of them will not even be able to survive this storm, because they're not people who have long cash buffers or strong mechanisms or funding processes. For them, this is a very, very hard time. Typically, for everybody in the travel space, this is a hard time. How we're trying to cope up with it is simple. One, we have to face it head on. We have to face it with bravery, and we have to ensure that we don't panic. We know what is the time required for this market to come back, and therefore we utilize this time in a lot of technology and product development activities. The entire product line will change post-COVID, and we have to adapt ourselves to the traveler, which is the post-COVID traveler. This time of era is being utilized in ensuring that we are ready when the market comes back to go in full flow. That's what the entire team is working on right now.
So as they say, mending your nets while you can't fish.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
But having said that, you define essential versus non-essential travel. And during my various discourse, I tell people, I said, when we talk about essential or non-essential, we look at it from our perspective, the traveler perspective.
Yes.
But having said that, at least where Indian families are concerned, the travelers are connected to a lot of people within their families. You have kids which are less than 10 years old. You have parents perhaps who are more than 60 years and ailing. So it's not only how fit you are and what kind of confidence you have, but what you carry back home.
True.
Travel. So, that by itself would pull, even in business travel. I was talking to somebody in business travel. I said that would itself pull, because somebody would say, hell with my company and my job. I can't have my 80-year-old father be able to be contracting that disease,
Correct.
So there is a lot of dependency of people. But when you say that, how do you see the traveler and consumer needs and behaviors changing? How do you actually see it happening?
So the typical consumer, the major shift will be from being a price conscious customer to being a quality conscious customer. And this is a very, very big shift that I'm seeing already, and it's going to happen more as travel will revive.
Right.
So till now, if you look at internet, there were immense articles on traveling international in a low budget. There are articles on shared living spaces. There are articles on hostel culture and stuff like that. Because the traveler's focus was being price conscious. Now this focus will completely move to being quality conscious. Instead of taking 3 breaks in a year, a traveler will be comfortable in taking 1 break, utilizing the same budget, but traveling in a very different way. Focusing on better stays, privatized stays, traveling in private cars rather than sharing group cars, big cars. So all these changes will bring in a high sense of quality And even the service providers will have to upgrade their quality standards to adhere to that change in mindset of the traveler.
Right, right. Well, Karthik mentioned about how you support startups. I mean, to my mind, in the COVID times, the definition of startups have changed. When I say that, typically pre-COVID, a startup or somebody, starting, who's an entrepreneur, wants to start a company, looking for Series A, B, or funding it himself, and typical. And there's a mindset, is a valuation mindset that I'll build a company, I'll eject out in 3 years, or whatever the thing would be. Now, what I'm seeing while I'm talking to people across, that the definition has changed. In many ways, people who have been in the business for a long time have become startups, because they're literally starting a new model all over again, right? They're reinventing themselves. They may be shifting gears to another model. So I've had a discussion to say, hey, you don't qualify as a startup. You've already been in the business for 10 years. He said, but I am a startup because I'm ejecting what I was doing earlier and I'm starting again. So that's a very interesting thought I have on startups, and I'm going to ask you deep dive a bit more on that.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing I've always believed, and Karthik and I, who've had a lot of conversations around this, is I said, the startups, it's like chalk and cheese. They start something and they're totally divorced from the existing travel ecosystem. Mm-hmm. I said, for them to really grow, and for they each has to feed on each other, like a wave. You can't suddenly build a model out of nothing, out of the air, get some valuation, and there is another game. So I think this time is giving, as I'm connecting a lot of people to each other, just as you and I are connecting here, I'm noticing that there are inherent strengths people can draw from each other. In the startup business, if I may use typically the startup. Chitra, you've been an experienced startup, if I may use that word. Although you've graduated beyond that, I think your views will be important in this.
Great. So the first part first. To me, startup is a culture. Yeah. Startup is a culture that we either keep in the organization or we change and move on to another work culture. So in spite of the fact that we're a 10-year-old organization and we are no more technically defined to be called a startup, yeah, we still refer ourselves at all points in the journey as startup, because we've maintained that culture in and out. So today, everybody in my team which was doing sales or customer service has nothing to do, because customers are not buying online. They're all building products. So this shift in gear, which suddenly happens overnight, and a person who has never been hired for building products, who doesn't know anything about building products, is being trained, coached, and is doing a fantastic job. This is happening because of that startup culture that has always been in the organization, and people never needed to do too much to do that. Because they were always very agile. Agility was very high in my entire team. So to me, startup has always been about the culture at the place. And we've managed to maintain that and grow that always.
Right. Yeah. I think that's pretty much state of mind. Yeah. If you think at any age or any stage in life that you are beginning a new day, like they say, every day you must learn something new. So if you get up in the morning and say, I'm beginning a new day, you're a startup for that day, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, even if I look at myself, and it's not something I shared, that on 1st of August this year, I've done 41 years in this industry. And believe me, I get up every morning and I say, it's like I'm starting again. So yeah, I agree with you. But I want to deep dive a bit more on this, especially on the financing part.
Sure.
And like I said, startups typically come, get a certain valuation, offload, eject, move. You haven't done all that, of course. But having said that, I even look at the larger play, naming or unnaming the larger OTAs or whatever the case may be. It's always been a case of profitability versus valuation, right? We've just today heard of Yatra, for example, perhaps looking at coming out of the New York Exchange, for one, and so on and so forth. So it's all a question. So how do you define profitability versus valuation? Do you see it staying here? What do you see staying here in terms of the balance sheets for existing companies as well?
To me, as a person or as an entrepreneur, I've always been the P&L person.
Right.
if there is a marketing budget, X budget that I allocate to my marketing team, there is a 5X that I expect out of them, and that is put very clearly on the paper even before the budget is allocated.
Right.
And they know that they have to, respond to that as and when we spend the money. So I have typically been somebody who's always believed in profitability. If my P&L is good, valuation will come. The day I want, valuation will come. But if my P&L is not in good shape, then valuation is in the bubble. And I'm not someone who would believe in the bubble much or who would be able to take it that much. So I've always been a hardcore person, ensuring that my profits remain in the bank, they keep growing, and I'm able to keep investing a part of it, but a part of it keeps growing so that times like this, when they hit us, we are able to manage and survive.
Right. And another interesting theory you're sort of advocating for me is that you operate out of Jaipur. So I was on a panel the other day where we had a bunch of Northeast people, and that wasn't a travel panel. It was a FICCI panel in terms of bamboos or whatever else other products in Northeast. So but there was typically a discussion around travel and tourism as well, and says, how can travel and tourism grow into Northeast? I said, the problem with you guys, when I said you guys, I meant here the panel in the Northeast, you are expecting people in other parts of the country to send you tourists, right? And you want to be the recipient. And you say, oh, we are building infrastructure around it. We are building lodges. We are building. I said, why can't you be the reverse? Today in the internet stage, why can't I see a Make My Trip come out of Shillong? Right? So who is actually targeting customers from all over India, all over the world, wherever the case may be, to come into Northeast. And here are you sitting in Jaipur. And I'm not saying you're targeting customers into Jaipur, but you have a pretty desperate team which sits across.
Yes.
Another thing I want to add is that when this work from home started getting a bit of momentum, I quickly said to myself, I said, work from hometown.
Yes.
Why do I have to live in Gurgaon and work from my home? I rather work from Jaipur if I lived in Jaipur, So tell us more. And I think that's something very interesting which should have worked.
It's very interesting. So I came back to Jaipur from Bangalore, and the main reason was a personal attachment to the place, family being here. But when I came here, it was an experimental move. I wanted to see that can I actually build an internet company out of the city? Do we have that talent? And only talent was the only important thing. Nothing else was important. Infrastructure, you just need internet. That's it, right? Everything else is okay. And as I moved on, I started realizing that there is a fantastic attitude that you see in people of small towns. They don't get that many opportunities otherwise, and therefore the opportunity that they get, they value that a lot more than the big town people, the metro people, because they have ample opportunities. And that attitude actually changes the game altogether. It changes it so much so that a person who was doing X output can do 3X output if his attitude is right. If the state of his mind is right, I can coach him better, I can train him better, and I can get a lot more out of him. So I don't say that I don't need a metro office. I do have a small office in Gurgaon. 4-5 people work out of that. I have 2 members based out of Mumbai. I have 5 members based out of Bangalore. I have a few more spread across various other parts of the country, depending upon where travel is happening more, MP, Ladakh, Northeast, and other things. But the core head office being in Jaipur actually gives us a lot of advantage. And the biggest advantage is the kind of talent, the kind of attitude that I get here. I mean, it's truly a family. And these are amazing folks. These are people fresh out of college or 2 years into the industry, 3 years into the industry. And if you see the pedigrees, the kind of stuff they have done with us, amazing.
Yeah.
And it's purely because of attitude. So I feel a lot of advantage in going. In fact, that's what I tell Abhishek. There are a couple of more years in Jaipur, and then we're going to migrate to smaller villages.
Yeah. Let me come back to this Northeast. I'm trying to visualize it, and because it's seriously playing in my mind, I'm trying to visualize the 7 states which you call 7 sisters. They are, of course, very remote, and you're into adventure. They offer exactly the right kind of product which you seek out. But when you try and market out And so here it's you who actually sets up an internet. It could be, you could be based in Shillong, which I said that, an internet-driven outlook, which actually gives the contents of local, the experience of local, to showcase to the rest as a specialized Northeast entity. And then it integrates into other platforms also, right? So instead of waiting for somebody to send you a tourist, here is local going global, as they say, as a prime minister says. So my next question, of course, would be that it's not only local going local, but that actually can transform into going global. So do you see Indian companies moving into being an Expedia? So it's two questions really again into one. Do you see Indian entities like yourselves or more actually becoming Expedias of the world? In other words, becoming international. I do understand that there are challenges when it comes to FEMA, banking, etc., which holds us back. But now with the government changing its policies and many things are happening, would you sort of, as a last question, say, people, open your eyes, look broader, and there are plenty of opportunities you can, which probably you haven't thought of.
Absolutely. There are plenty, immense opportunities. In fact, I feel my eyes have opened after coming to Jaipur.
Right.
So certainly there are immense opportunities, and people in smaller towns, smaller cities also have a lot of capability to do larger things, global things. Right. There is immense opportunity lying out there. They need to be guided right. They need to have a mentor or someone who's showing them the right direction, helping them a little bit, and I think the rest, they're very capable. In fact, just because you mentioned Northeast, I've worked with a lot of people in my company from Northeast, and I think they're some of the amazingly hardworking people. I mean, a lot of hard work I've seen in almost every other person I've worked with Northeast.
Yeah, because they're fighting their own challenges of coming out from where they come out from.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, let's hope that the next round of startups, if we may use that word, do come out from the States, because with boundaries, travel being without any boundaries now, e-commerce, of course, has flattened the curve. Technology has flattened it more post-COVID. Digitalization is further flattening it. And so, Chitra, we see more of you and more of companies like yours who can seek a niche in their own states to develop into operating platforms.
Absolutely. I do see that.
Any one-liner before I put you back to Karthik to conclude?
One-liner?
Anything you want to share with the audience?
I think on entrepreneurship, I can share a line which I've always believed in, which is that the journey is more beautiful than the destination. And we enjoy this journey much more than the end.
Right. Great. So I move you back to Karthik on that. Karthik, over to you. Thank you.
Lovely hearing to you, Chitra, and I completely resonate with the last inspiring line you mentioned. And along with that, I have a small line of thought I wanted your feedback on. Was a lot of times when we talk about these adventure tourism or experiences in certain key locations, there is a question which is now occupying a lot of mind space even in policymakers' mind, is sustainability. Because there have been a big debate around people going into these places and then whether it's about waste disposal or whether it's about just preserving the natural sanctity of that location is becoming a huge challenge. And over the years we have seen significant tourism campaigns being also started by various state governments. But I think at the end it's a lot to do with the operator, with the consumer education and inspiring them. What are your thoughts around that?
Absolutely. So to give you an instance here, when we do these treks in the Himalayan belt, it's a very important policy that the operators and the end consumers follow, and my team ensures that this is never violated. And the policy is that you bring back a lot of waste. The waste that you are creating, you do not spoil it there, and you put it in a bag, and this bag is brought back and disposed in the right way. Because if there are thousands of people doing the Valley of Flowers trek or the Harkidun trek or the Chadar trek, the kind of damage that we're doing to the environment is immense, right? So there has to be ways into which we actually start thinking more. This is the bare minimum that we can do, that we don't spoil and put waste there. But then there's a lot more that has to be done in terms of, introducing better policies on the entire trip, on the entire tour, and ensuring that not only the waste is minimized, but people are also giving back to the environment. To give you another example, every year we do cleaning drives in the places where we do deep business. So we do a lot of business in Ladakh. And after the season finishes, we do a cleaning campaign in Ladakh. And likewise, we're planning more of these in the coming days in many more cities and destinations.
No, in fact, I think if all the tour operators take it up, that post-season, they'll all come together and do a cleaning drive. I think that will make a significant difference.
It will certainly make a significant difference.
So on that positive note, we are at the end of this session. Thank you so much, Chitra, for joining us. And thanks, Ashish. Thanks, everyone, for joining in for the session. And we'll see you on Thursday for our next session on Coffee with Ashish. Till then, stay safe. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.